Welcome to Cure America. I'm Star Parker, and Washington, D.C. is abuzz this week. My goodness, it's been busy. We've got the NATOites in town. I guess they're going to do the whole NATO thing. They have all the streets shut down. Why do they have to shut down streets? I thought these guys were environmental protectionists, and why are they needing streets to do anything? But whatever they're going to be doing over there, we know what's happening also in the White House, and that's a whole lot of sweating going on. And so I've been listening and looking and trying to figure out what their game plan is next, as we are in a political election year. And my goodness, after all that we saw at that debate, we are going to believe our own eyes. We don't care how they try to spin this coming out of the White House. Congress is out, so they're out there probably lying, cheating. I don't know what they're doing out there, telling people different stuff. But in the meantime, one of the real buzzes that has happened that you need to know about is that the Supreme Court has come down with some amazing decisions, some good, some bad, but amazing, because everything that they do impacts all of us when it comes to interpreting law. So what I've done this week on Cure America is got some lawyers in here so that I can figure it all out, because I probably, like you, don't sit there and read constitutional thought coming out of the Supreme Court. I actually tried to watch some of the testimony the other night on C-SPAN and just totally fell asleep during it. So instead, I said, I got an idea. I have a really good idea. I'm going to invite one of my friends, Alfonso Aguilar. Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
It's all good. It's all good. You know what? You guys are making a real big difference moving that Latino vote over toward the red team.
It's happening. It's happening.
It is, isn't it?
And one of the interesting reasons is it's cultural issues.
Yeah.
They're concerned with what they perceive what it is. The Democrats' extreme agenda on trans issues, even on life. They think that they realize that Democrats are pushing this abortion during 9 months.
Yeah.
With very little regulations.
So the message is getting out.
The message is getting out.
You know, it's interesting that how the Latino community and the Black community are both moving away, but for different reasons. You're telling me they're on the social issues. Blacks are more on the economic issues.
And so the economic issues matter.
Yeah.
But we've done poll at American Principles Project, and it shows that the economy is certainly an issue. Inflation is having it's very tough for working Hispanic families, but cultural issues are as important.
How interesting. Well, that's a good thing, and we'll probably have to have you back then to talk about that, because I want to do a deep dive on what is happening. CURE has just brought out our report on Black behaviors and opinions, and so I'd like to hear the Latino side of that too, because a lot of others are asking the question, my goodness, what's changing in our society? What are we now doing right that we have all of America's attention? But this time we're going to talk about the Supreme Court, and I invited you because you are a lawyer. You hold a BA from the University of Notre Dame and a JD from the University of Puerto Rico. A lot of people pretend they don't like lawyers, but you guys know you like lawyers. You like doctors. You like lobbyists. Anytime you need somebody's expertise, that's when you like them. And I have Rick Manning. Rick is Americans for Limited Government, not a lawyer.
Not a lawyer.
But a political scientist, so I'm actually going to have you do a whole lot more than just talk, okay, this time. I need your help, because I don't even know what I'm going to be asking about. But I do have a constitutional lawyer, Jonathan.
There's another one.
Yeah, you're a constitutional attorney. You are Liberty Counsel Action.
Yes, ma'am.
You guys have had a lot of action.
Yeah, I mean, good work in the states, good work in the federal courts where we're operating, and obviously an eye towards Congress. You know, 6 or so months left. Want to see what a Republican-held House can continue to do, and obviously want to see the makeup of the Senate change in the next few months. So a lot going on there in Congress.
It is, but you spend a lot of time over there at that Supreme Court. In fact, you made us, hurry up, guys, I got to get over to the court.
Yeah, very true.
So that's a good thing. So we're going to pick your brain.
Us and 10,000 protesters,
Well,
depending on what
that's true, too. But some of the protesters are just there because they know what's right from their gut. What we're going to need from you is a little deeper interpretation. And then a good friend. Oh, Carrie, I think everybody knows you now. Carrie Campbell. I didn't know Campbell was in there before. Severino.
My maiden name, yeah.
Yeah, okay, because, well, we know you by Carrie, and we know all of your life. We know that you're the president of JCN. We know that you're an author with Molly Hemingway, and it's a best-selling book that you guys did on the Kavanaugh. I think that's when everybody got to know you really well, when we saw how intense the discussions are about the Supreme Court. And while the left was in control forever, they didn't seem to mind so much, you know, the type of decisions that a liberal court brings down. But now, all of a sudden, because Trump put 3 people on, the court is, well, in the hot seat. So I'm glad that you're here. Let me tell a little bit more about what you did. Because you two are lawyers. She's a lawyer too. I needed
You're outnumbered officially.
and I wanted to be outnumbered because there's no need. You know, one of the reasons that I left talk radio years and years and years ago when I was working with ABC and then Disney bought ABC is because what I found in talk radio is people wanted you to pretend that you knew everything. The pressure was on that you were the expert on everything, and I knew it wasn't true. And the more I learned in the Bible, the more I felt I was lying to my public to pretend I knew something that I just read about an hour ago and had all my notes in front of me right then. So I really appreciate that you guys are lawyers because this is really important stuff. And so you were a law clerk to the Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, our hero. You're a graduate of Harvard Law School. Not everything
No,
is bad.
there were some great people. That's where I met my husband. So there's some good people. There's some good people at Harvard, but I have to say it's behind enemy lines.
Well, it is, but there's some good instruction there too. And I think that sometimes when you go between the lines and get in there, everything is not really bad. You know, my daughter's in the acting world and everyone thinks everything in Hollywood's broken. And no, some people just live traditional lives and get up and go to work every day. But no, I'm just kidding. But Harvard Law School got you to working with Clarence Thomas, and now you're at JCN and you're an author, and you were Duke University, Michigan State University. So we really welcome you. And you took out of your busy schedule. Those of you that don't know Carrie, she's just everywhere on every news outlet in high demand because of her expertise on these issues from day one. You're probably over there at the court when they were hearing the discussion, right? Or
it's now almost more efficient to listen to it because now you used to have to go to the court if you wanted the real time stuff. So even if I didn't want to get there super early and get into the courtroom, I would go, and as a member of the Supreme Court bar, you could sit in their extra overflow room and listen live because then you were the first one to hear everything. Nowadays it's on C-SPAN. So
yeah, that's true.
To be honest, I mostly listen at home because then you can be by your computer, you can take notes, or I've got 6 kids at home, so I can, be making lunch while I have a guy's quiet because mom's listening to the Supreme Court decision or something.
It's been amazing how some of us at this table have grown up with you to see your life and to see how, and we just so admire you in that. And I'm glad that you stay awake during C-SPAN, so you can now be a part of the discussion. So I need some discussion, and Rick, I'm going to ask you something because you're going to have to help me navigate this. Sure. We're seeing headlines like justices send Florida, Texas social media law back to lower courts. Supreme Court says cities can ban homeless from sleeping outside. That's a good one. I like that one. And that one I do know about because I follow social policy for sure. After landmark Chevron ruling, could Workplace Safety Agency, OSHA, be the next Supreme Court target? Supreme Court lets a truck stop sue the Federal Reserve in latest threat to agency regulations. Now, of course, these are headlines from mainstream media to the left who are trying to now make us afraid of some of the decisions. We all know the immunity. Okay, that's the one that's been on every news, and it is shocking that we actually allow for presidents to make decisions they need to make without having to look over their shoulder and wonder if they're going to have a lawsuit. But I guess because Trump is involved, all of a sudden, it's shocking to everybody that the court would allow for any president to have that type of environment to where he can make hard choices. But this Chevron, we can get into that, guys, if you guys want to go into the muni one, if you want to. But there's some, and then I think, Jonathan, you were very in tune with what happened on abortion law and stuff like that. So, Rick, I want to ask you to explain to us why we should be concerned about Chevron in a nutshell, and then get the panel involved in the discussion about it, because I'm not sure the details.
Yeah, Chevron, what the decision was, is there's something called Chevron deference. I'm going to have somebody else.
Chevron sounds like a gas station.
It is a gas station. The original case was Chevron against the NRDC, the National Resource Defense Council, in 1984. Okay. And it was an environmental case. Okay. And what they decided was, well, whatever the bureaucrats say, that's what goes.
The bureaucrats meaning the nanny state, the people that are in the departments here.
And so, and effectively, and it created something that was known as Chevron deference. I know that some of you can talk about this a little more in depth, but the fact is that has created a vast number of decisions based upon not a critical evaluation of what the bureaucrats were saying or whether it's true or whether held up to science, but basically bureaucrats say it, they looked at it, we're deferring to them. Okay. And so we end up a lot of law based upon that. the Supreme Court had the opportunity to bring up, to take a look at this, and actually 2 cases that they merged together.
Yeah.
But Carrie, tell me, what is Chevron deference and what did the Supreme Court do?
Yeah, so this under Chevron, what the Supreme Court was doing, and it's funny because
That's how we say it, Chevron.
Yeah, when they decided it was
it's a gas station.
Yes, it's a gas. I mean, they were the litigants originally, and when they decided the case, they weren't thinking we're remaking how courts look at administrative law. They just decided this one case. They didn't even have a full court, like 6 justices sitting on that case because people were recused or whatever, and they said, anytime there's an ambiguity in the law, then basically whatever the agency says, we'll go with that. I think what people were trying to do at the time is, let's get the court out of all of these complicated stuff. It'll be easier, more efficient to just defer to the agency. What we have seen happen in the subsequent years, though, is that just gave the agency a 10-ton thumb on the scale anytime they're involved in litigation, which litigation against people like you, like me, like businesses everywhere, right? So this meant the government has a trump card every time. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the case that just came up, the Loper Bright and the Relentless cases, we're looking at fishermen. Mm-hmm. And in this case, there's a fishery board.
That's what you asked.
Yeah, they get to decide. They're regulating all the different things about their catch, right? But they said, and the statute says this, it says you have to carry along a regulator with you. Someone.
What department is that?
It's like the Northeast Fisheries. I mean, it's Magnuson-Stevens Act or something.
So wait, let me see if I'm understanding you to make sure that others are understanding you. So
I'll say, Star, because
go ahead.
You fish off your boat.
Yeah, I do.
If you were to do it commercially, it would mean that someone had to stand on your boat and watch every catch, make sure you weighed it properly, and that person would basically come with a checklist and see if you followed all the regulations. And if you didn't, they'd file a report or whatever. What became a problem is that
got to be kidding.
You had to pay that person to be on your boat. So part of your catch, not only are you getting a percentage of it taken down for taxes or whatever, but now you're paying a person just to sit on your boat and watch what you're doing. The
government was saying all the decide who that person's going to be.
No, and the statute says
like TSA. Every time they would say, we're going to pat you down, I'm like, do I get to decide? I want that guy. I don't want that girl. Why do I have to do? Okay, but go ahead.
In this case, TSA is looking over your shoulder as you're packing.
Okay, what you're telling me is that this is an area where federal regulators determine law, how they're going
to
do
the statute says you have to carry this guy, right, on the boat. And half the time these are people who know less than the fishermen they're regulating, but whatever. You got Big Brother, you have to carry him on your ship. What this agency added on to that is, also because they're short on funds like everyone, they thought it's going to be much more efficient if instead of us paying for it out of our budget, we make the fishermen pay for it. So that's where they went and said the fishermen now not only have to bring this guy, which costs them space, which can cost them added danger and added complications because you're bringing this, the person doesn't know what he's doing. They now have to pay their salary. And what they said, this is how far ambiguity has gone. Because they used to say, well, the law is ambiguous in whether you pay for it. Here's how the law is ambiguous. The law doesn't say you can't charge them for it. So now anytime there's just, the law doesn't say, no, you're not allowed to make people do this. Oh, it sounds ambiguous to me. That takes a huge, cracks the door way open so they can shove all sorts of interesting stuff in.
And you talk about a nanny state.
Absolutely. And you're paying the nanny.
This is what
you're already doing through taxes.
Right.
This is why this case
you started, Richard.
This is why this case is so important. Perhaps one of the most important rulings in the past few years, because it's really curtailing the administrative state. And this is what the left wants.
But explain administrative, because I think sometimes we speak in language here that others don't know what we're talking about, an administrative state.
The administrative state, look, in our country, we're in a democracy. And we govern ourselves, our democracy, through our elected officials.
Right.
With this doctrine, basically, what the agencies, the federal agencies, were doing, we're saying, so this law is ambiguous, so we are going to establish policy, set policy.
In the agency. Okay.
And
I'm beginning to understand a little bit better.
So basically, they're usurping the power of the legislature, and at the same time, it's saying, the doctrine said, when the courts see the interpretation of the agencies, the court has to accept interpretation of the agencies. So it's taking away the power of the courts as well. So in a way, with all these cases, I think what the Supreme Court is doing is restoring the constitutional order, right? The executive has a role, the legislative has its role, and the courts, obviously, they have their role of interpreting the law. So this is taking away the power of agencies in different areas from...
which they don't want to relinquish, because you've written on this a lot because you're Americans for Limited Government, and I know that I've been teasing you about that you hadn't been doing a good job at that, because we do have an incredible administrative, what you guys are calling, or a nanny state. Well, what?
It all falls on his shoulders.
But this must be good news for you, because it sounds like from what you guys are saying that this limits a lot of the power that we've seen departments and agencies and all these offices do things that no one knows that they're doing it until now they're at your door, and there's nothing you can do about it except pay them out.
I think that Alfonso understates how important this is.
He said it was the most important when I called him the other day. So that makes it even more important, doesn't it? Of all the cases.
Since Marbury?
I think this is the first time we have a legitimate chance to roll back the administrative state since FDR was president.
Wow.
We have this fundamentally changes the relationship between the bureaucrats and the people, the bureaucrats and Congress, even the bureaucrats and the president, and certainly the bureaucrats and the courts. What's happened in our country is our country was set up to have three branches of government that were co-equal, and they were basically balancing powers where they were checking each other, and it was a tug of war over who was in charge.
Someone just asked me what those three branches were. A grown-up, an adult, a very affluent adult. So we're talking the executive branch,
legislative, and judicial.
Okay, go ahead. No, hey, you know what? We've lost it, and a lot of people in the schools are not getting it anymore. So we are back to the simple.
And so what was happening is the administrative state is part of the executive branch. Okay. Except for nobody can fire them. Yeah. Okay, so they're not really part of it. They're only partially part. That's where they fit in the overall rubric.
And they're not elected by anyone.
But they're not elected by anyone. But like Rick said, they also get to stay. I mean, they do stay.
But they are part of the executive branch.
Okay.
The executive branch's job is to execute the laws that Congress passes and that the Supreme Court and the courts deem to be constitutional. So what they've done is, instead of having a limited approach to how they're going to interpret the laws, they've had an expansive one. And in doing so, they have dramatically expanded the size and scope of government, taking away the Congress's power, your elected officials, taking away their power to make those decisions, and because
they found the ambiguity that you were talking about, Karen.
I'd say it does another thing to Congress. For a conservative Congress, of course you're going to be upset if you went through all the work of passing a statute just to have an unelected bureaucrat. There's 2 million of them deciding on what the directed elected officials want.
2 million in Washington. They're like 24 million across the country.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
So a massiveness
of government.
Massiveness of government. But on the other hand, it allows liberals who are writing statutes to create ambiguity, to not do the work that Congress is, the specificities of every law. They create ambiguities and say, oh no, we have an agency that'll take care of the rest. Right. So it not only does it expand the executive branch, but it allows Congress to be more and more lazy. Certain laws that they've passed certainly couldn't have received all the votes that they would have to become law had they been specific and actually put out what they wanted. And so they create these ambiguities on purpose.
On legislators,
which is
to
important.
actually
It's an important
do
shift.
their job and write laws that are specific.
That are more specific, and then we need to watch for those laws that are more specific. And you want to give another thought on this?
Well, I was just going to say, Jonathan's right. All of the incentives, because this is when Trump talked about the deep state, these are the people who are the deep state. These are the people who have career jobs, the vast majority of whom are just knee-jerk liberals. So if there's an ambiguity in a law, we know which direction it's going to be resolved. Wow. It's going to all be resolved in that way. So a lot of, and there's an inherent incentive for Congress to be lazy, even for the Democrats, certainly, because they know it's going to all break in their
left
direction,
anyway.
right?
Yeah.
But also, just say you're trying to come up with a negotiation of, I don't know, how many parts per million, carbon dioxide you can have in the air. There's going to be people on both sides making these arguments. If Congress comes up with these decisions, we might go back to them and be like, hey, why'd you make it so high? Why'd you make it so low?
Right.
And they're responsible.
They have to answer the questions.
It's easier for them to just say, oh, I passed a law that says make the air clean.
Right.
And then if anything
Wow.
goes wrong, no one can do anything about the bureaucrats who made the call. So they have no accountability now. It undermines what's supposed to be our the way our system works, which is if you mess this up or we disagree with the way you wrote this, then we can kick the bum out, but we can't kick these bums out. So now it's back in Article 1,
back to where
legislative branch like it's supposed to.
Like it's supposed to be. And I think the examples that you guys have given, whether it's environmental policy, whether it's fishery policy, but also when you think about social policy, Jonathan,
absolutely.
we've had these discussions
these
before.
timeline-
So I'm going to take a real quick break here, and then we're going to come back. I want to get into some of these other decisions, because even though Chevron he said it's the most important, and then you said it's more important than the most important.
Mostest was the word we
the mostest
fell on.
of all of the
I was
decisions.
disputing his timeline.
I expanded my time.
Well, I tell you, there are. This one sounds like. The beauty of it is that we actually now will have accountability the way that the country was designed. So we're going to look more into that. It is law. You might not have to go to law school to find out all the details of it. You may be feeling the relief in the various industries that you're in just because of this decision now, not being able to set rules, especially in business and over business, that you don't even know how it happened that way until you get the knock on the door. But I do want to look at some of the social decisions that they made as well. So we're going to go into some of the other decisions of the Supreme Court right after this important message.
I know it's not my words that helps a person, it's God's word. It's the power of the gospel.
God sent his son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. But on the third day, God raised his son to life. The Bible says, but he wants everyone to come in repentance. But you ask Christ into your heart, he'll give you that strength, he'll give you that power. But you've got to be willing to say, God, help me. By faith, trust Jesus Christ.
Fascinating discussion, and even including during the break. I think I'm going to go to law school. I wonder which one I'll go to. I know which one I'm going to. I'm going to the brain of Carrie and Alfonso and Jonathan and Rick. You're political science, so we're the ones that get to solve all the other problems, and then they have to figure out the details.
We create the problems, and they have to figure out how to fix them.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute. Half the problems that we have in our society today, we just had discussion about. The administrative state, bloated government. I'm not taking the blame for all of that. I'm creating the problem for. I know I'm putting the solutions out there. If you created the problems, you're the liberal on the panel today, which would be very surprising.
I just didn't win.
You just didn't win. Okay, but Rick, I want to know more. But I think that some of this, I know the topic, but I don't know what happened at the court. That social media law, that homeless law. Oh, I do know that one. There are a lot of stuff that you guys were just talking about that I don't know. So take it away and let us know what we should be thinking about.
Why don't we start with the homeless one? Because it's a the Supreme Court basically said that cities can ban homeless from sleeping on the streets without permission. And that seems logical.
That had to go to the Supreme.
Why did they have to do that? It seems like that's pretty logical.
Well, I mean, look, what they were arguing here, even though this is the kind of law that has been, most cities have and has been around for a long time.
No loitering, for instance.
Right, no loitering. They said this is cruel and unusual punishment, and they're based it on
Wait, which part? To let them sleep on the street, or they get
the Ninth Circuit?
Who are
the Ninth Circuit. So this is the most liberal appellate court.
Right, but
in
it
the
is
country,
cruel
probably.
and unusual punishment to let people collapse their lives and sleep on the street, or they were saying the opposite.
Yeah,
they were saying that to allow them not to sleep on the street is cruel and unusual punishment. This is what drove this case.
That is correct, and I think that's why it should have been a relatively easy answer for the court, because it's the punishment. anyway, our courts have started to use the idea of cruel and unusual punishment, not to talk about the punishment, because we're not talking about, well, I don't know, are they is they giving them a death sentence for sleeping on the street? Maybe that's cruel and unusual. I don't know. No,
they have their own death sentences.
They're giving them a fine. So the punishment clearly is not cruel and unusual. What they're saying is it's cruel and unusual to even criminalize this behavior, and that's switching the understanding of the Eighth Amendment completely on its head.
Yeah, now, this is what's interesting is that Justice Gorsuch, who wrote the opinion, basically explain that when you're talking about cruel and unusual punishment, you're talking about the method of punishment. And you see all the cities in the West that have serious problems with people sleeping in public places, and they were limited. They couldn't do anything to deal with the situation because of this ruling by the Ninth Circuit. So this is a perfect example of judicial activism, of taking a premise from the Constitution and giving it a meaning that the drafters of the Constitution did not have. However, when you see the dissent from Justice Sotomayor, she sounds like a policymaker, like a legislator, not like a judge. I don't
want to say that's why worldview matters. What the statute, what they were trying to argue is saying that, well, these homeless people have the status. They sort of have, I don't think it was as far to say that a permanent status, but they're saying part of inherently to that human is that they're homeless. Therefore, if we do anything to them, including tell the rest of the public that you can't camp here, you can't protest here, oh, by the way, yes, that does affect homeless encampments, that you're attacking their status, and that's what's cruel and unusual.
The same, the extension of all that they've done through other civil rights law, that we have status for your gender, we have status for your race, we have, this got to be kidding. My brother's been living on the street for 25 years, and his status is not homeless. His status is he's on drugs and alcohol, and he won't pull his life together, and we really want him help. And the thing about it is, on the homeless situation, the help services are now in trouble because the government has taken over in this area.
And that's a critical point. What it does by protecting, as it were, an individual's homeless status, it's saying that, well, government can't put forward programs that would interrupt their status as homelessness. I don't think it's stretched to that point.
It's cruel and unusual.
Yeah, it's cruel and unusual to interrupt their homelessness. But
it's cruel and unusual to let people person and all of their potential just collapse on the street like that.
To decay there. Of course, the
So this was a good decision.
I think it was absolutely a good decision.
Yeah, it was. I think there's the broader situation is we're getting to a point where the left is arguing that there's a right to housing, okay? And this right to housing is basically taken down by this decision by saying, no, the localities have an ability to say, no, you're not, we can enforce our laws and make it so we don't end up with a homeless encampment in front of our local businesses.
And we see it in D.C. We see encampments all over the place.
Yeah.
So this basically empowers a mayor to say, period, we're going to pass an ordinance where you cannot camp.
But also help. If that is an impetus of liberal mayors to clean up their cities, but also help, this also frees their hands to say we're going to put programs, since these individuals don't have this permanent status that is cruel if we change it, we can put forward programs that'll start to clean up the streets and help their lives.
Well, that's when it started, was when Barack Obama moved all of these help services from HHS over to HUD because they thought that this was a housing problem. Yeah. So, Carrie, are we going to be able to move it back to where folks can be categorized for the help that they actually need?
Well, I think what they were doing here, too, is even more subversive because they're actually, what they said is that, there's not enough beds in this area and so people can't sleep, but they refused to count beds that were offered by religious charitable shelters. Yeah. So they said, oh, well, we can't expect people to stay there because if you go to this one, you're not allowed to smoke, or you might have to attend religious services. So they were saying,
beds.
Right, of course, because these are people who, out of the love, love for God, are doing this on behalf of their brothers and sisters, right? But we're not even counting that as having an option. So people now have a right not just to sleep on the street, but they have a right to reject housing if it's requiring them to maybe be raised to a higher standard, or if it's being offered by people who are religious. That's a real problem, and I'm very glad the court didn't endorse that.
Well, I'm glad they didn't either. In fact, we're going to do on Cure America a show just on homelessness. I'm hoping to go to Dallas to show you some incredible work that's being done there, and then all of the service providers who were hurt because this out of control Ninth Circuit sounds like now that has allowed for all this, or Barack Obama allowing for it through HUD. So maybe we can start to see some correction. Rick, what else should we be looking at? What happened at the court?
We talked a lot about the abortion cases last week, but I do think we have to take a look at that again.
Yeah, what happened?
You had in Idaho a decision where the state of Idaho was trying to defend their abortion laws, and they lost at the appellate court level, and then the Supreme Court didn't take up the case. Jonathan, talk to us about that.
Yeah, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, obviously it became clear that states can regulate their abortion practice. They can limit abortion. Idaho's coming from the perspective of wanting to save as many babies as possible. The Biden administration is coming from the perspective they want to kill as many babies as possible. There's sort of this convergence or middle ground. This is from the courts, not necessarily where I stand on it, but from the court saying, well, there's this middle ground in the emergency room. Idaho is saying no abortions unless it's to save the life of the mother, sort of in that emergency condition. We will ignore the rights of the fetus, ignore the rights of the baby, and focus on the life of the mother. The Biden administration is coming all the way over and saying, well, any emergency room has to perform immediate abortions, sort of to stabilize, but we're going to use this new sanctuary of death, as it were, to mass produce abortions. And Idaho, you can't place any limitations on that, especially if we consider it being necessary to save the life of the mother. So the Supreme Court, without answering the tough question, and you saw some of the dissenting judges say, hey, just answer the tough question when it comes to abortions, they decided to say, no, there's this sort of middle ground where we can read Idaho statute on top of Biden's intent.
Like what kind of tough question? What they wanted to do?
Yeah, well, a couple of things that they should have answered more clearly is the conscious protections for the doctors that did not want to perform abortions in Idaho. Idaho now is forcing these small medical centers that maybe have one doctor on staff in a rural area to perform the abortion. And if they don't have an abortionist on staff, because the Biden administration, technically that hospital now has to shut down. So the court kind of gave lip service to conscious protections, but allowed the creation of this problem to continue by not speaking directly to where are we going to place the rights of the baby that's in the womb, even in a situation that does have an immediate reaction to it as it plays out in the emergency room. And
but it was very divided decision, right? Okay. So I think there was a lot of back and forth on what is a serious harm to the woman's health, right?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. And Carrie, it's only two females on. I'm so glad you're here because half the time I'm only with the guys and they try to beat me up and they try to interrupt me. Oh no, I do that to them. I forgot. But Carrie, it's almost like they're throwing when you have a miscarriage or really an emergency in with the word abortion. That Biden won't even use that word, and so it is kind of graying it up. So women don't understand, and people are getting afraid to say, "What if there really is an emergency? What do I do?" Because what made me think about this, Jonathan, is you just said about, if you're in an emergency room and a doctor's there, and especially in a rural area, which usually, not always, is more conservative in the way that they practice. They say, do no harm. So if he's going to make a decision that's right for both the mother and the baby. I don't know what we can do to kind of get the narrative right to say that when we're talking miscarriage or we're talking, challenges that there's no other way to save that life of that infant in the womb, we can't roll this up into these abortion discussions.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They're intentionally confusing the topic. And as someone who's unfortunately suffered miscarriages, as many women have, it's really offensive to have people kind of equate that as if you can't tell the difference between if a child, yes, the same technique of if there's material left in the uterus after the child has died, you might have to have the same technique that they would do if you're having an actual abortion. But there's a world of difference if you are doing that to kill a baby versus if you are doing that because your child has already died. And some of the examples, so Idaho, unfortunately, does have to, they just don't have as extensive of a healthcare system, particularly in the rural areas as some places. So they do have to airlift women to other states sometimes. And a lot of the examples that they were giving were, in fact, women who weren't getting served by emergency rooms because they were having miscarriages. And that's a very different thing. And Idaho's law recognizes that, too. It's also, I think they're intentionally confusing the idea of what is an abortion. If a woman is dying and the only way to stop her from dying is to end the pregnancy. If your goal isn't to kill the baby, that's not an abortion. If you would say, hey, let's induce labor early and we hope the baby lives. We're going to put him on life support. That's not an abortion. That's not an abortion. You're trying to do your best to save both. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's not possible. But that's a very different thing from saying, hey, we're going to affirmatively kill this child. Idaho's law, I think, recognizes this. The government has this vested interest in confusing it, and unfortunately, I think some of the hospitals involved, because they would like to have abortion legal more broadly in Idaho, they kind of seem to be complicit in trying to create this impression. They seem to be airlifting women that, I'm not sure if they need, they're trying to create a record that makes it look like this is causing more issues. In reality, the real difference between the two is very small because EMTALA, the law they're using, that it specifically says you have to stabilize a woman who comes into the ER, and if she's pregnant, you have to stabilize her unborn child. They're trying to use a law that actually recognizes the humanity of the unborn child to shoehorn in abortion. And the law really, the only way they can do it is if there's a situation where the woman's health would be seriously injured if they waited until, say, she was truly, her life was at risk to try to end the pregnancy, to have early labor or something. It's a very narrow number of cases, but they're trying to use that to open the door to just
abortion.
much more
But that's
broad
what generated confusion.
Yeah,
with Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh, they both said that they didn't see the conflict between EMTALA and the Idaho law, because the Idaho law prohibits abortion with the exception of the life of the mother.
Because with these maybe just
So was
a
that
few
a
tiny
win one that we
examples.
had?
No.
No, it's not
No, it
good at
wasn't.
all. But it's a
But
win.
it could return to the
but
court.
Well, you know what? I'm hoping it's a win that it will make all abortion thought and decisions come back to Washington, D.C. This every state have its own way is not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Well, Idaho's doing the right thing here. It's D.C. that's
Well, I
messing
know
it up.
that
I'm
Idaho
just saying.
was doing the right thing. And so
be
most of
careful
our
what you ask
pro-life-
for, because if it comes back to D.C. right now, or God forbid if Biden wins again, we know what's happening.
Well, we know
Right?
that, and I think that's why a lot of eyes are on the Senate. And so my point is that where we're winning, like with Idaho, we don't want that to constantly end up in court, so then we end up with a loss like with what happened in Idaho, or I think we saw it in Kansas, or we saw it in Ohio, no other places. So this discussion, state, and I get it might take time, but ultimately
You can't have two Americas when it comes to the abortion issue.
No, you can't.
We're going to have to answer the question squarely.
we will.
But this case isn't, as Alfonso said, this case isn't totally finished. It's still in the process because the court kind of took it a little early in the process. So it'll still work its way through. Maybe it gets back. We'll see.
Okay. Well, what else you got for
on
us?
the same topic, morning after pill.
Yeah, well, another regulation, right? This is Clinton in the last 6 months saying that a pill that is otherwise used to help with stomach ulcers can now be mass-produced, mailed, and shipped to homes in order to end a life. And, we've talked in very graphic nature of what it does. It starves the baby within the womb, turns the baby gray. Another pill is sent to the mother where that baby is expelled, and the mother is told, hey, don't look in the toilet. It'll just look like a heavy period. That's the abortion pill. It is insidious. It is upwards of 70% of the abortions that are committed now are done with the pill. There were challenges to whether or not the FDA even followed its own rules. So the case that was brought up was a number of doctors saying, hey, the FDA didn't even follow its own rules in the regulatory process of putting this pill forward. You have to go back and do the work. Talk about the amount of lives that are lost, the mothers that lose their lives, or the complications that come afterwards, or the excessive bleeding, all these things that the FDA has not just ignored, but they said, we don't want to listen to any of these complaints unless they result in death. These doctors are saying, for the purpose of our patients, for the purpose of the women that we're helping, and for others, women all across the country, the government has to hold, or the Supreme Court, you should hold the FDA accountable in them ignoring their own rules. And once again, this is one of the ones where the courts decided maybe we won't pay attention to this. We'll push it back down and let the infighting
Maybe
go
we
on
should
at
be
the
arguing
level.
to expand the court so that we can put more
I think you see a
conservatives
majority
on.
trying to kind of avoid the issue.
Yeah.
Well,
we know there are 3 justices that consistently are willing to address it: Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch.
Right. But you're right.
But
Alfonso,
in this case, they just basically said the doctors have no standing.
well, you know what?
But remember, everyone in this case agreed they had no standing, which is a
That is true. That's
consistent
right.
position for the conservatives in the court, because the conservatives tend to be real, and standing really just means, are you the right person to bring this lawsuit? It has to be, I can't sue because you got hit by a car, right? You have to be the one.
Right,
So
right.
if they're not being injured, really the ideal person might be a woman who had experienced excessive bleeding, had to go to the ER, which even the FDA admits 1 in 22 women who takes this drug has to go to the ER first. I mean, it's outrageous that that they're just overlooking that. But that would have been someone they would have said, okay, this person's clearly harmed. The ER doctors are saying we have to do. We're having to be dragooned into finishing abortions on women, and that violates our conscience. We have to get away from the other patients who need us in the ER, because we're having to take care of women who shouldn't be given this drug, or whose doctor should have been following up with them, because now doesn't have to be a doctor who gives it to you.
But they said they didn't
So
have the
that is something that's consistent for the conservatives.
Yeah.
The liberals in the court just a few years ago said abortionists can sue on behalf of their clients, but somehow now pro-life doctors can't. So they're willing to let anyone come in as long as they're liberal.
Well,
the conservatives are consistent and are more strict about it, but it makes it hard.
This issue will be revisited.
That's what you took the words right out of my mouth, and that, exactly, and continue until it's not only illegal, it's unthinkable. So I want to, Rick, ask you about another thing, because I don't want to run out of time on the Supreme Court. We just saw so many things, and I think that we still have some regulatory stuff that I'm a small business, others are small business, but I do want to ask you about this social media one, because that one sounds like trying to get ahead of something that maybe we can't control.
That's very simple. Florida, the state of Florida, the state of Texas, created a law that said the social media companies can't censor people from Florida and Texas on their social media platforms. The Supreme Court said
so that's not the one on the pornography. That's the one they're going to be taken up to say that you got to tell the age of the people that are going on to.
That's a law that's being fought about right now.
That they're going to take up next session. But this one's saying that so you can't.
Well,
they block us all.
This is about states not having the ability to control how social media platforms operate
in their states.
In essence, and it goes,
so this might be a loss then.
It's.
So,
yes, it's.
Does anyone else know about that case?
But you have to make the judgment here. Do you want to have 50 different internets? Okay, that's the challenge with this. I would have voted for the Florida law or the Texas law, but I don't know that you want 50 different internets, because the lowest common denominator will end up being what's the internet. So that's the challenge.
But what they were trying to do, Jonathan, because I'm trying to figure out what Florida and Texas were trying to do was say that you cannot discriminate or censor
They were trying to
people
protect conservatives from being censored by the social media companies.
And the court said.
Yeah, well, it was just one more step back, because I don't know the ruling. But big picture context, where can a user,
back to the States,
or an individual using social media, place their content there, and how much leverage does government have in either regulating it in their own state, or the federal government coming in a sort of a pair case that also talks about a similar issue. Federal government come in and tell social media, hey, you have to take that down. And so it was two sides of the free speech, conversation.
Yeah.
Free speech has been done historically on our sidewalks and in our public parks. Now that it is going to the internet, where there are private owners allowing that speech to continue, the big picture question is, where can government come in and sort of put their finger on the scale as to what speech is allowed and what speech isn't allowed?
And especially when you have immoral or pagan or secular, whatever we want to call society, I think that might have a lot to do with it. You can be anonymous and hidden online. Carrie, did you follow this one at all?
Yeah, and I'll say that it's a challenging thing to try to draw, because what this case ended up recognizing, and this was brought as what's called a facial challenge. They had to show that there's like no way that this is broadly wrong as to all types of social media. I think that was.
Wait, who had to show that?
The challengers had to Sorry.
The states had to show. Okay, so somebody challenged.
Because there's so many.
Well, let's think about it. Okay, let's go ahead. Slow it down a little bit. So the states passed rules, and then they got challenged.
They get challenged by these organizations.
And two different states passed the similar rule.
The challengers are saying we have First Amendment rights too. So Facebook and Google and all these different places are saying, look, we do this kind of moderation. We want to be able to take down, say, pornography. We want to be able to take down sex traffickers.
But they take all the conservative stuff down.
The court has to assume they're doing it. We want to be able to block terrorists who are trying to. They say we have a First Amendment right too. And remember, if you are running a conservative social media group, say you don't want to have some of these things on your thing. It's a challenging thing, because you're like, well, if I were running a social media, I want to be able to say, okay, can Truth Social or Parler, if they wanted to, say you have to follow certain guidelines. Right. So it's actually really challenging to draw that line of how this works. The court did leave it open to the possibility that, hey, if you come back with a more specific thing, like saying, okay, we can definitely regulate these sort of things, but it was so broad. It was regulating everything from Etsy. I mean, things that you kind of are going, is that social media? But technically,
that's what you were saying.
Technically, could be. It was just maybe too broad, because it brought in a lot of.
I mean, you couldn't even
say stuff.
You couldn't even question the pandemic and whether there were other alternatives.
And that would be the flip side of the case. So there was, the government, either the DOJ, but definitely the Biden administration saying, hey, we don't like this sort of content being spread on your channels. The question was, how far did they push Twitter or Facebook to get the content down? So there are emails back and forth saying, hey, have you seen this on your own website, your own platform? Sort of, can you take it down?
Which is censorship at that point.
But
this leaks over to
so that's a second case.
That leaks to the Missouri case,
Was it Missouri at the Supreme Court too?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's the opposite.
It's kind of the opposite thing.
Okay.
And if we can briefly talk about this, because we do want to talk about the other ones. But in the Missouri,
that's all I got. I think
we got this big guy
in the Missouri.
Oh yeah.
The Missouri case was very simple. It was whether or not our FBI intelligence agencies could use social media companies as cutouts to censor speech without them having their hands on it. They just were telling them, we really want this taken off the web. And we saw that happen with COVID. We saw it happen on election stuff.
Yeah.
We saw it happen on a variety of different things.
Right.
And
and always that of the right. It was always that was, there was a case brought by the Attorney General of Missouri, who's now the U.S. Senator from Missouri, Schmidt. And it was, no, you can't do this. Okay. And the Supreme Court kind of kicked the can on it. They said, Carrie, I might mischaracterize because I was really mad about it. But what they actually said was, bring us more proof that there's actually bad stuff happening, and then we will decide on it. And Alito, in his dissent, said, we got plenty of proof to decide on this. We know what they were doing, and we need to deal with it now. And so that was the dispute. And the majority decided they were going to kick the can and wait, essentially allowing the government to do exactly what they did in the 2020 election in the 2024 election. So that's what they did. You're saying, Jonathan, like you kind of agree that this is a discussion that we're going to have to continue to have, especially now with AI. I mean, our beautiful pictures are AI. And you get that in the dynamic, too, to where algorithms can tell you who, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, the enemy is. And you end up with a whole lot of liberals controlling narrative, even on the internet. I know ourselves. There are contents that Ariel will put up and no one sees it because somebody blocked it.
One through line is, can a Biden administration sort of lean onto privately owned organizations and say that you have to limit this speech? Can government come in and
They
say...
did do that.
Yeah, and they're not allowed to. So the First Amendment said government cannot put their thumb on the scale.
The Supreme Court is allowing them to.
They're allowing
The
them.
Supreme Court is allowed. So that's why you're upset about it. Because that's supposed to be, but you're saying that they did allow it.
There was a parallel case coming out of New York where they were trying to lean on regulators, and in this case it was insurance companies.
Who they?
The state of New York.
Okay.
To not allow the NRA to say offer an insurance program, right? And this court got it right in that one.
That.
And they said, no, you can't do that. You're coercing them, and it's based on their viewpoint. It's not based. You're not just saying everyone can't do it. You're saying, well, we don't want the NRA to do it because we don't agree with them.
Right.
In this case, unfortunately, it seems like the bar is so high. It's going to be very. So they still say you can't do it, but the problem is they've set the bar so high to prove that it's really happening that probably, and this is what Justice Alito was saying, it's hard to imagine a government, if they're smart, they're going to find a way to work around it. They don't leave a trail.
Especially since the FBI used them as cutouts deliberately to avoid the First Amendment problem. Yeah. They're pretty smart, and by the way, if you try to find out they're doing it, they just tell us, well, that's national security, you're not going to get the information, and you never get the information. The only reason we know any of this, we knew it happened, but the reason we know as much happened was because Elon Musk bought Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay? That's the only reason we know this happened.
And because of personal experience, Star, the fact that you can put something out that disagreed with, how the election was run, or you wanted to have your own pharmaceuticals for COVID-19, or you were enhancing or standing up for parental rights. If you were putting that content out and it wasn't reaching your viewers, that's how we're realizing.
Not only not reaching our viewers, if you recall, when we first started, it was Cure America. We were in the pandemic, and we just wanted to interview doctors that had a different side of the story. And next thing we know, we're 2 strikes on YouTube, and Vimeo just shut us down totally. So,
but a big part of that problem too is, we know it's clear that that kind of censorship is happening. Who is doing it though? Because as long as it's Facebook, Google, all these people, if they're doing it, that might be bad, but that's not violating the First Amendment because they're not the government.
That's right.
So
that's
the
right.
hard thing is showing that connection.
Yeah.
If the government just walks in and says, "Oh gosh, that's fake news. That's not really correct."
Right.
Also, maybe have a hearing about your industry next week. I mean, if they make that connection too tight, then maybe we can say it's the government doing it, but most of the time they're smart enough to just kind of let that all go unsaid.
But you know what? But you're bringing up something I think we should be concerned about, maybe even larger than government, because government is us, and we can change them, and we can expose them, and we can try to get cases that then the Supreme Court will say that line is there. But when you think about businesses being able to get away with this is, you brought up earlier, Carrie, about how conservatives generally are on the side of business being able to operate, especially if they're private owned and operated. But now they're picking winners and losers. This is something that we would have to look into. Rick, one final thing. We don't have a lot of time left, only about 5 minutes. And you said that there was something else important that happened at the court.
Well, there's a lot of them, yes.
He did. He told me that. And I'm like, good, tell me, because I don't know.
We're going to do a lightning round here,
Okay, I'll stay out of it. I want to hear you guys.
We talked about standing, okay, where if somebody can actually bring a lawsuit. Supreme Court had a case on standing that was important, dealing with a truck stop being allowed to sue the Federal Reserve.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And that standing was simple. The whole case revolves around a regulation that went into effect well before that company ever existed. This company exists. Suddenly they have harm done to them by that regulation. And the government's argument was, well, you knew what the rules were before you started, so you shouldn't be allowed to sue. And the company said, no, we should be allowed to sue. Your regulation is causing us harm. And so the Supreme Court said what, Carrie?
They said you can actually, it has to do with how long, you have 6 years to bring this lawsuit, right? So instead of 6 years from the very beginning, it's 6 years from the time it was actually harming them. And so they still can bring their lawsuit, which does make it makes it easier for people to be able to challenge these regulations. So that's one of several other cases that go along with the Loper Bright, the fisherman case, to help just bring back reality to the deep state.
Yeah, I would say
and then with that other one you told us about, the Chevron, if they all work together, we might actually see small business thrive again.
And that's the thing. The Jackson dissent said, well, well, every company that starts is going to sue the federal government just so they have clarity on what they can do. And I think that's a very fine thing, so that small
I think
business
that's a good
is
idea.
able to challenge agencies and say, no, I want to run this business, or the pursuit of happiness, pursuit of property. Theoretically, philosophically, in this country, I should be allowed to do that without big brother government coming in and telling me what to do. And if they do tell me what to do, I should have the opportunity to push back and say, no, we're going to sue you just to find clarity as to where my limits are.
Well, and especially on this one, because what I'm hearing you say, Rick, that the regulation was already there before they bought the company. And so if you didn't know the regulation was there before you bought the company, but you can't operate the company with the regulation there, we should be able to sue them.
And that's
For clarity.
For clarity, if nothing else, but also so you can do your
It
business.
also, it also redefines when when you're able to sue, because as Kerry said, you got 6 years.
Okay,
And it's
okay.
from the harm, not from when the regulation started.
Yeah.
Okay, okay,
That's
okay.
that's
Otherwise, they just kind of grandfathered in.
that's where now there's two we want to do really quick.
Well, you better do them real quick because we got about 3 minutes. Okay, so tell me.
1 minute. We're going to do the Bureaucracy decision where. Go ahead, just explain.
This one goes. This goes along with the anti-administrative state. A lot of these agencies, they'll sue you. Like in this case, it was the SEC suing someone for fraud, but they don't bring you in front of a U.S. court. They bring you in front of their own courts. And guess what? Their own courts rule for the government almost every single time. So what this said is, you have a right to a jury trial, and that means you have a right to a jury trial when the administrators are suing you as well. So that was another great one.
Now, what is it called?
This was the SEC versus Bureaucracy, but they're not the only. The SEC aren't the only people who have their own
Labor
courts.
Department has
Right.
them.
So
Oh my
now,
goodness,
like,
it sounds
yeah,
like we had some great
the
things
Bill of
happen.
Rights still applies. So
Yes.
that's the bottom
Imagine
line.
that. What a
Wow.
crazy idea.
And that
Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
now, that's
so,
great.
So I know we want to get to one more though, right?
Yeah, Cargill. Okay, the bump stock case.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. That one has got a lot of press.
The bump
And
stock case.
Yeah.
All right. So 5 seconds on how this fits in. All of the regulatory agencies are wrong. This was there's been a long-standing law, right, against machine guns, and it said you have to, with each pull of the trigger, if you pull the trigger once and multiple rounds fire, it's a machine gun, right? For years, ATF said we can't. That doesn't cover bump stocks because you have to pull the trigger. It pulls the trigger multiple times, and we can't regulate this. After there's a shooting in Las Vegas, obviously a horrible shooting, and everyone's saying, wait a minute, this guy used bump stocks. Maybe we don't want these to be legal. Instead of having Congress say, okay, let's make bump stocks illegal, which would have been an option.
Gets back to what Alfonso was saying, makes them do their job.
The agency, and this time it was under Trump, so this shows you the administrative state can overstep under anyone. They said, actually, on second thought, we can do this. This is bad enough that we're going to do it. That's not the answer, and they just rewrote the law. So now millions of dollars worth of bump stocks had to be destroyed or confiscated, and come to find out years later, actually, the Supreme Court says, nope, you were wrong. If they had followed Chevron, by the way, absolutely, the agency could have done whatever it wanted because the statute is reasonably ambiguous there. But they said, nope, the law doesn't cover this, just like you said for years. This is exactly the kind of thing that the administrative state does. It can just turn on a dime, switch its interpretation with each new administration, and it can require people to then jump into line and destroy their bump stocks or follow whatever other costly regulations. Yeah, so this was a good example of the court saying, you know what? You can do that if you want, but Congress is the one who has to do it.
You know what? Oh, gosh, you guys.
And
This
that
was
is
a
the
great
roundup.
panel. That's the roundup. Thank you, Rick. Oh, my goodness. You can co-host for me all the time. And then you can sit in for me on other times when I need a break, Jonathan. Sure. Wow. I hope that you guys learned a lot, as I did. And I think Alfonso said it best what he just said. Now, it's going to force the legislators to just do their jobs. So that means you better know who you're voting for and what your legislator's going to do on not just the issue that concerns you most. Yes, border. Yes, economy. Yes, inflation. Yes, housing prices. All the other things. But also the regulation of just the businesses themselves, because you can be sure they do pass on those costs to us. So I think that this was very healthy discussion. Thank you, panel. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Jonathan, Rick, and Alfonso. I'll be seeing you because we have to do that show about the Latino votes. I want to do that too. And I hope you guys want to hear that show as well in the future. Tell your friends about Cure America. We're growing like crazy, especially on our podcast. We love our networks. Thank you so much for staying with us all these years. 3 years now, 4 years. And then make sure you remember Ecclesiastes 12:13. Fear God, keep his commandments. That's really can make our day. That's really all that we're required to do. Just be good ourselves. We won't need a nanny administrative state. See you next week.
it in my heart years ago to do this work of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education.
We are incredibly privileged to have pastors from across the nation here for training and collaboration on solutions to help our communities.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be fought for.
The Declaration meant what it said. All men are created equal.
We're to awaken, train, and mobilize the church as a whole, but the historically black church in particular, to end abortion in our communities.
Every church needs to do everything it can to help be an educational hub.
The crisis of the day is the sexual gone wrong, and it's going extraordinarily wrong. Us Christians are called to correct that by living the sexuality that God has given us.
It was the church who created the idea of educating every boy and girl. The idea of public health care, guess where that came from? The church. It was actually the church who was commissioned to do the work of charity. Guess who's actually robbed you of part of what it is that you're to do? It's government, and they failed miserably at it. They're not called to do it.
Government is not God.
Are we going to bow to government, or are we going to bow to God?
Kids need to see that confidence that we have about the truth. We're not in doubt about who we are.